All right, what's up, GraphQL Summit? Awesome. It feels so great to be here today with all of you. I see a lot of familiar faces in the crowd, a lot of new ones too. And I mean, look at this venue. It feels absolutely amazing to be here on this stage in this absolutely incredible venue. Little known fact, a lot of really famous people who have actually performed here. So, I mean, Lady Gaga has been on this stage. We've had Skrillex, Wu-Tang Clan. So I kind of wanted to set the mood a little bit before my talk and kind of, get in the concert vibes, have a little fun with it. So if everybody could, if you are able, please stand up. I know, it's right before lunch. Come on. All right. So please stand up. I want you all to put your hands in the air. And if you love GraphQL, let me hear you scream. Woo! All right, awesome. Okay. I mean, I'm not as cool as Lady Gaga or Skrillex, but my name's Peggy, and I am an engineering manager at Apollo, where I lead a team focused on making the Apollo developer experience awesome. So what exactly does that entail? So my priority is to make sure that all of you in this room are successful with GraphQL. So literally everything that we build, from our open source libraries to our cloud service to our developer tooling, all of it is designed to help developers, just like you, ship apps to production faster and write better code. And I think that mission has resonated with a lot of developers because Apollo has grown over 400% in the past year. And it's been absolutely incredible to see Apollo Client take off this way. We're actually reaching nearly 500,000 downloads per week. And I don't think this is an accident. I think it's not really because GraphQL and Apollo are trendy, it's really because they solve real-world problems that React developers face every single day. And I think all of you in this room who have built a React app before, you can probably attest to this. So I think probably one of the hardest problems that we face as React developers is how to manage state in our applications. So first we have to pick a state management library. And the most popular choice is probably Redux. And then, after we picked the right library, then we have to worry about choosing the right middleware. We have to worry about asynchronous action creators and data normalization and selectors and all of these things that just take like considerable mental overhead. And then on top of all of that, before we've even made our first network request, we also have to think about how we're going to build complicated features like pagination and optimistic UI. And this can be a huge burden. So what Apollo does is it takes all of that complexity and it removes a lot of it significantly thanks to its intelligent cache and its built-in network stack. So instead of writing thousands of lines of Redux boilerplate, all we have to do is just simply write a query. And in that query, we describe the data requirements that our components have. And once we have that query, we then just render a query component, bind it to our UI, and then Apollo Client just takes care of the rest. It tracks your loading state for you, it tracks your error state for you. It even provides handy helpers like fetch more to execute things like pagination. So it really just takes all of that complexity over here and just boils it down to GraphQL queries and UI, which is what we know. So I think typically when people think of managing data with Apollo Client, they're usually thinking of data from a remote graph API. But over the past year, more and more developers are actually starting to manage their local data with Apollo 2. So when I talk about local data, I mean things like maybe device API results or the network status, whether a modal is open or not. And you can actually manage that data with Apollo Client 2 alongside your remote data. And that's what Apollo Link State gives you. So this idea has really taken off. I mean, in the past year, now over 30% of Apollo Client users are actually using Apollo Link State to manage their local data. And it's really amazing to see how far it's come, because it actually just started off as an experimental idea. We previewed it right on this stage at GraphQL Summit a year ago, and it's really resonated with developers. And I think for a couple of reasons, but probably the most compelling is that it's really an elegant programming model, and it solves a real need, which is why companies like Netflix and Airbnb and Hilton are all using Apollo Client to manage their local data with Apollo Link State in production. And this is huge. And you'll actually hear from some of the developers on these teams today. You probably heard from Adam Neary, how they're using it at Airbnb. You'll hear a talk from Shruti at PayPal later. She'll talk about PayPal's migration from Redux to GraphQL. And it's just truly amazing to kind of see the rapid adoption that we've had from companies who are now managing their local data with Apollo Client. So what caused this to happen? Like, why did it take off so quickly? And I think it's because developers, they want one source of truth when managing their data. So one of the most compelling benefits of Apollo Client is that it actually handles all of this data. So you have your data from your Graph API, and then you have your local data. You can even store data from legacy REST endpoints in the Apollo cache as well. And you can do all of this without the need for a separate Redux or MobX store that then you have to synchronize. So having this one source of truth, in this case the Apollo cache, it significantly reduces complexity and mental overhead as you're developing. So, okay, so we have the Apollo cache, we're storing all this data in it, and another reason why managing local data with Apollo is so revolutionary is that GraphQL just becomes this unified interface to all of your app's data, and you end up querying all of your app's data the same way. So here's kind of a sample query. We have remote data coming from our GraphQL API, and then we have some local data too. And the local data we prefix with that client directive, and that's how Apollo Client knows to send that part of the query to the cache. So, and this is really great because when you think of our React components, they're not just made up of one kind of data, right? Like you have your React components, they're made up of many kinds of data, whether it's remote data or information about the network status or a modal. And with GraphQL, we can query all of that data in exactly the same way and just pass it down simply to our component. So finally, I think the other reason why this idea has caught on so quickly is because the early adopters of managing local state with Apollo were sold on the promise of bringing the excellent developer tooling that we know and love with GraphQL on the server over to the client. So I think if we could leverage GraphQL's static typing and maybe the concept of a client schema, we could enjoy the same features that we have on the server, like GraphQL Playground, for example, like autocomplete and jump to schema definitions that we experience when we write queries for remote data. So when we launched Apollo Link State, none of this was actually built yet. It was really just a promise. It was an idea that we had in our head. However, we quickly followed up with an early working version of Apollo DevTools that would actually stitch together your client schema and your remote schema from within GraphiQL. So over here, the liked photos, that was coming from your client schema, the dog and the dog queries, that was coming from your remote schema, and Apollo Client DevTools would just stitch that all together. And that was kind of our first proof of concept. This is really just the beginning. So for the last 6 months, we've really focused on taking this idea and making it bigger and really just delivering on this promise of excellent developer tooling. And I think with one source of truth for all the data in our app, one unified interface for querying local and remote data with GraphQL, and excellent developer tooling, Apollo really does help React developers by eliminating the barriers to building data-driven apps. And we're really, truly invested in making sure that all developers can benefit from our software. So recently, I asked a question on Twitter asking if any bootcamp students or developers new to programming had used Apollo before. And I didn't really know what to expect, but I was absolutely blown away by the responses. It was really cool to see. so many new developers had chosen Apollo because it actually simplified state management in their apps. And they were able to learn GraphQL and get up and running in only 2 weeks. And I think this is really a testament to how straightforward data management becomes when you build your app with Apollo. So Apollo isn't just for developers starting out, however. Although we pride ourselves on a great getting started experience, we also want to make sure that our software scales for large engineering organizations. So as you heard in Adam's talk earlier this morning, Airbnb uses Apollo Client to manage their remote graph API data, their local data, and their legacy REST data all in a single request. And actually, since they've switched some of their apps to Apollo, they haven't even needed to load Redux at all. So this is really cool. And kind of what we've learned throughout the past couple months, just speaking with developers on large teams and small teams, is whether you're new to programming or whether you work on a large team, everybody wants a straightforward, opinionated way to manage data in their applications. They don't want to write a ton of boilerplate. They don't want to synchronize between a bunch of different stores. All they want to do is just specify their data requirements and have it show up on the page. And Apollo really fills that need perfectly. And I think all of these learnings are really what have influenced our plan for the next version of Apollo Client, which is why we are so excited to announce Apollo Client 2.5. So we have a lot of really awesome features to show you, and the best part is that you can actually try it today just by installing the alpha. So let's see exactly what is in Apollo Client 2.5. And I think the major headline here, which I am so stoked about, is that we are merging Apollo Link state into core. So yeah, I'm super pumped about this because just having maintained the project for many months before I was an engineering manager, literally 70% I think of the bugs filed on the repository were as a result of miscommunication between the client resetting the store and Apollo Link state not being able to adapt. So by making this decision and merging it into core, we're eliminating a whole class of bugs and making it much more stable for things like server-side rendering and also instances where you would need to reset the store. So, okay, so we're merging it into core. Like, what exactly does this look like, and how can I get started today? So the first thing you're going to want to do is define your data model with client schemas. So client schemas are just like the schemas that you write on the server. And the difference here is that you're going to actually use the extend keyword to extend your remote schemas types. Now this not only allows you to define queries and mutations, but it also allows you to extend server types like launch here and add virtual fields onto your data, which are then stripped out before you send that request through to your server. So this is really cool, and it's not something that you could easily achieve with something like Redux, these virtual fields. But it's also worth mentioning that these schemas are not enforced at runtime, like on the server. Instead, we're using these schemas to inform and power our developer tooling and making it much more intelligent. So once you have your schema, then you'll just specify your resolvers, which are just like the resolvers that you write on the server. The only difference is that the Apollo cache has actually been added to the context, so then you can read and write to it seamlessly. And what we really like about this is it's just one familiar programming model across the client and the server. It's elegant and it's intuitive, and you only have to use it once. And then you can immediately be productive on both the client and the server, which allows you to collaborate better with your teammates and also get new developers spun up quickly on your stack when you just have one way to write resolvers across the client and the server. So, okay, so we have our schema, then we have our resolvers, and what do we do next? So finally, you'll write your query, and you'll specify client fields with the client directive. And then all you have to do is just bind it to your UI as you normally do. So one of the things we really care about and we wanted to accomplish with this latest version was making sure that we could enable code splitting. So at Apollo, we really care about making your apps performant and following all of the latest front-end development best practices. So we've built into the ability to dynamically add resolvers from within your components. And that's something that we could only accomplish by merging Apollo Link State into core. So that was a huge reason why we did it. And it's really cool to see, if you're using this in an app, you'll only load those resolvers once that component has mounted. So it's a really great way to execute code splitting with Apollo. And that's not all. We also have some other really exciting, highly requested features. So now local state management has support for subscriptions, which is awesome, especially if you're working with device APIs, doing any sort of position tracking. You also have the ability to export local fields as variables for server data. So one of the things we heard a lot was people kind of wanted to chain events, almost like sagas, for example. They wanted to read a value from the cache, and then they wanted to use that value as a variable for a query that was sent to their server. So we piloted this with the Apollo Link REST, and it worked out really well. So we're bringing it to Apollo Client as well. So now you'll be able to export these local fields as variables for your server data. And finally, we also have the concept of cache initializers. So before with Apollo Link State, you could write your default state to the cache, kind of like you have initial state in Redux. And now we have the concept of these cache initializers. So you can use them for local data. You can use them for remote data. They can be synchronous if you specify them in the constructor. They can also be asynchronous as well. So we're really excited to kind of see the applications of these and how people will use them creatively to prime the Apollo cache however they wish. So with all of this focus on the Apollo cache and us kind of dumping more and more data into it, it was really important to us that we kept the cache fast and performant. So Ben did a lot of really, really excellent work re-architecting the Apollo in-memory cache to the point where it's now on par with the fastest GraphQL cache implementations in the world. And users who have tested this out have been reporting improved speeds by 2 times on average, which is amazing. And it's stable now, so all of you can try it. It's really awesome. And if you want to learn more exactly about how Ben did it, definitely check out his talk tomorrow. It's going to be in the lodge. It's called Apollo Client Caching in Depth. So don't miss that one. It's going to be awesome. Cool. So, but that's not all. We wanted to deliver on this promise that we had made when we first set off building local state management for Apollo. And we wanted to build out amazing tooling that leverages GraphQL's type system for local data. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about what code we write, it's also about how we write it. We spend a lot of time in our editors. We spend a lot of time in browser developer tools and on the command line. So it's really essential that all of our tools work seamlessly. So that's why we're really excited to announce that Apollo VSCode is finally live. So you might have seen some teasers on Twitter for the past couple months, but we've really been working so hard on getting this right for all of you. And we are so excited to share it with the world. So who wants to see it? I'm going to need a little more enthusiasm. OK, awesome. OK, so hopefully this video is working. As we write our queries, you'll see over here that you immediately get real-time metrics from Apollo Engine of the performance cost of that query. You also get autocomplete because the VS Code extension will connect to your schema via the schema registry. And this is really cool. So you'll see here you kind of have all the autocomplete. As you add new fields, those engine metrics are going to pop up immediately. So as you're developing, you already know how expensive your queries are going to be, and you can adjust for that. What's also really cool is that you can switch your schemas. So perhaps maybe you have a new version of your schema that you want to test out. You can just seamlessly switch to that schema from within your editor. And you'll see here that in the next version of our schema, that name field is actually going to be deprecated. So we alias it to full name in order to avoid those warnings. And then, furthermore, you can actually peek to the real schema definition from within your query. So you don't have to be jumping around across multiple files. You kind of just have it all right there, all of that information at your fingertips, so you can make smart decisions about how you're writing your queries as you're developing. So just to recap what we just saw with Apollo VS Code and remote schemas. So what you're going to do, it's really simple to just connect your VS Code extension to the engine registry. And VS Code will then pull down your schema from the registry, and it will give you real-time autocomplete as you're writing queries. And it will also give you inline tracing metrics on the performance of each field right from Apollo Engine. Then it will also view your schema change history to see if there are any deprecation warnings. And it'll let you know about that right from within the editor. You'll also be able to switch between schema tags seamlessly from your editor in case you want to test out different versions. And then you'll also be able to peek schema definitions as well. So this is all really cool stuff that you can do with remote schemas, but we're not done yet. So we've actually built in support for client-side schemas in Apollo VS Code as well. And this is something super cool. I don't think any other state management library on the planet can do this. So I'm super pumped to show you this demo too. So we are just going to let this play out because it looks like it's kind of the end there. So you'll see here that it has support for the client directive, so it's not going to error out upon that directive. You can actually peek the definition and see where it is in your client schema, which is really cool. You can add doc strings to document the fields in your client schema, which is a really good best practice for just making sure that your code is self-documenting. You can also hover, and you'll see the doc string there. You can jump to the fragment definition, which is really cool. So you just click on that, and you'll see each place in your code that fragment is used, all from within that one file, so you're not constantly switching around. The other cool thing is that if you don't have a particular field in your schema, it will alert you. So you know, OK, hey, I need to add cart items to my client schema. And you don't have to define your schema all in one file. You can actually define your schema right inside the GQL function right there, just to get that error out of the way, and then move it once you're ready to your main schema. So once we move it over to our main schema, you'll be able to see that we don't get errors anymore. So the other thing that's really cool is all of the types in our client-side schema, they have to be extensions of the types from our remote schema. So I'm kind of hungry, I'm misspelling things, and I type lunch here. Well, lunch is not a field in my remote schema, it's launch. So Apollo VS Code will know that that field's not in my remote schema, and it will alert me immediately so I don't make that mistake. So all of this is really amazing tooling. Just by writing our client-side schema, we get autocomplete intelligence. We get to peek our client schema definitions, and it's all right there at our fingertips. So to recap what we just saw, Apollo VS Code will connect to your client schema. And it will do this automatically. We have some sane defaults in place, but if you need to look in certain directories, you can do that as well. It will warn you if you incorrectly extend a type from your server schema. It will give you autocomplete for local queries. It will allow you to peek client schema definitions, and it will also tell you each place in your code that you use a specific client fragment, as well as doc strings too. So we're super pumped about this. I think it's super revolutionary, and it's just a really amazing way to leverage GraphQL's rich type system for local development. So that's not all. We've also added TypeScript code gen for client schemas to the Apollo CLI. So just a quick show of hands, who's a TypeScript fan? OK, I see a lot here. Yeah, so if you are into TypeScript, this is huge. I know Adam Neary and the team at Airbnb have been using this with great success. So you should definitely check it out if you are into static typing. So we are super excited about the future here. I think all of this amazing tooling is really great, but we want you to be able to know how to use it. We want you to be able to know how to use it correctly. So that's why we're doubling down on our investment in teaching these concepts, which is why we are announcing the official Apollo tutorial has launched today. So this is really amazing. I think it's been a long time coming. People have really been asking for this. But this tutorial will walk you through everything I just described in my presentation. So you'll learn the Apollo platform by building and deploying a real-world full-stack application. And we intentionally made this a little bit more complex than Hello World because we want you to be able to quickly just get up and running with building a proof of concept at your company. So we've included real-world features like pagination, authentication, local state management, testing, connecting to the VS Code. It's all right here, right in this tutorial. So definitely check it out and let us know what you think. It's available today at apollographql.com/docs. So that's kind of what we've been working on and what's available today. But I think we're always kind of have our mind set on the future and what's next with Apollo Client. We've already started thinking about Apollo Client 3.0 and what's on the roadmap. So I wanted to just kind of take the time and give you all a little bit of preview of what we're thinking about next. So the first thing that's on our roadmap is merging Apollo Boost into Client Core. So if you're unfamiliar, Apollo Boost is just a really easy way to get up and running with Apollo Client. It has the in-memory cache and the link chain already set up for you out of the box. And we've heard a lot of feedback from people that this was really great, like they loved using it. We also have some handy functions as well that you don't get with the core API. And we want to just bring that amazing Apollo Boost developer experience into core. But at the same time, we don't want to bloat your bundles with a bunch of unnecessary dependencies. So we're also working on getting that bundle size down so that way adding Boost into core isn't going to inflate your bundle size. So that's something that we're actively working on to make sure that your bundle size stays small, but you're also having that great developer experience. So the second thing on our roadmap, which is highly requested, is cache invalidation. So I think everyone has kind of run into this at some point where you need to invalidate multiple queries from the Apollo client cache. And we're finally tackling this on. It's a hard problem to solve, but it's something we're committed to solving. So some things that we've been exploring, we were thinking of maybe introducing the concept of cache tags and sending tags from the server to the client to automatically invalidate queries. And we're also exploring the idea of garbage collection as well. So if queries haven't been fetched in a long time, just automatically evict those from the cache so the cache isn't growing too large. So we're actively working on that, and we would love any feedback or use cases that your teams could provide. And the third thing that we're also working on, everyone has been asking me, what is Apollo Client doing about hooks? And hooks are really awesome. The at ReactConf, the React team released an alpha about 2 weeks ago. And I think they're really great, but we need to let the dust settle a little bit. It's only just an alpha. They're not stable yet. So we really want to see kind of where things shake out with Suspense and also async server rendering before we make any decisions about changing the React Apollo API to support hooks. So we're actively working with the React team on this, and we're really excited to kind of see how the future of React evolves and how that influences Apollo Client. But one thing's for sure, wherever React goes, we're going to go with it. We want to make sure that how you're writing Apollo Client apps is exactly following the best practices that you would be taking when writing React apps. So this is a lot of stuff, and we can't do it alone. We really want your help. So if you're interested in contributing, I highly encourage you to check out the Apollo feature requests repo where all of this is going down. Give us your use cases. Give us your feedback. If you've ever experimented with any of these things yourself, we definitely want your help, and we want to hear from all of you. So We know how hard state management and React apps can be, and we've really been laser focused over the past year on getting this right. Because at the end of the day, our main goal is to make sure that all of you in this room are happy and productive using GraphQL. And I think part of that is really giving you the guidance to do state management the right way. And I think with all of the new tooling with VSCode and the Apollo CLI, in addition to the elegant programming model that managing local data with Apollo gives you, is really where the future of front-end development is heading. So I know you're going to love all of this, so definitely just try it out. Let me know what you think, and come find me later if you want to talk state management with Apollo Client. Thank you all so much.